So I'm Ande, CEO and Editor-in-Chief of myWorth, and today I'm very excited to have Edy Nathan here with me. And Edy is a keynote speaker, author, workshop leader, psychotherapist, and a self-rising grief doula. So I am super thrilled to be having a very deep and introspective conversation about grief. And she's written her book. Her book is called It's Grief. And what I love about this book, besides the fact that Deepak Chopra wrote a little something on the back, is that it's about the dance of self-discovery through trauma and loss. And we're going to be talking a little bit about all kinds of grief today. But Edy, maybe you could just give us a quick snippet of what does a grief doula do and who are they? Because that's such an unusual term.
So doula is really someone who moves you through a process. So I think of myself as this grief doula. I'm redefining really how we see grief and how we move through it, how we identify it.
So if you would like to hear more about this discussion and about grief and how you can be looking at your own life and thinking about periods of time when you're dealing with different issues and where grief is appearing, then you'll want to watch the whole video. So we are super excited to have you join us here today, Edy.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So Edy, tell us a little bit about your journey, your career, and how you got even interested in grief.
So sometimes there's something that just knocks at your door and says, pay attention, and grief was it. I would say that I kind of came into the world knowing about grief. I don't exactly know why or how, but there was a yearning, and that's kind of what I think grief is. It's a yearning. It's a yearning for something that maybe you're missing, or some part of you that you feel you want to learn about, and it's just not there. You're just not able to grab it. Through a series of my own losses, from having been massively overweight and being really chided as a result of being over 220 pounds, and that was grief, and losing my first husband and being sexually abused. Those are all things that affect us in really, they're big hits. They're really big hits. And that kind of grief, that kind of loss, you either go crazy from it or you decide to enter into it. And I guess I decided, okay, well, I'm gonna make my life's work in trying to understand exactly how to walk with it, how to dance with it, and how to make it something that is one of my greatest teachers. And that's what it's become. And that's what I hope to give to other people, is the sense that grief does not have to be an enemy, that it touches us in ways that we can't even imagine. And even in the financial world.
You know, I think it's so interesting to think about grief. There's the typical way of grieving where we think about the death of a loved one, perhaps. But there's so many other areas of our lives where we experience grief, you know, whether it be the ending of a relationship or whether it be, you know, my daughter's going off to school in a few days. And so as she's leaving, there's an ending of a period of time and there's a grieving process. And you said something I think is really important for us to kind of dive into. And it's something that you talk about in your book, It's Grief. And that is the dance of self-discovery through trauma and loss, and that dance that you mentioned.
The dance.
Because so many people, I think, with grief either stay in a state of denial for a period of time. They certainly go through those stages of getting angry and doing that. But it's only when you start to fully go into it, where you're starting to dance with it, you're feeling everything that comes with it, that you can get through it. Do you find that to be true in the
It is so true. It is so true. It's like you got to learn how to partner with it, because when you don't partner with it, it becomes an enemy. So instead of making it an enemy, make it your teacher. You know, grief is not linear. And it comes at you in so many different ways, and in ways that you can't even imagine. I know I can be walking down the street and there's a scent in the air, and I am catapulted to a time when my husband was alive.
Right.
And it was like, whoa. And I'm even talking about it, I have chills right now.
Right.
So we get sensorially affected by our losses, by what we can't even explain. And you know, there are no words. There are often just no words for what we feel in our bodies, what we feel in our souls. And it is truly an experience that other people can't understand because it is as individual as you are.
You know, there's something interesting about that with people. So many people don't want to feel that. They tend to kind of keep it at arm's length.
Yeah.
They don't want to absorb that. How do you work with people to get them to cross over and start to embrace it and not be, mourning that loss and start to kind of absorb the memory, the feelings? How do you bridge that gap for people?
It is bridging the gap. And everybody's going to do it their way. So that the first phase, because I really look at this process through phases. Mm-hmm. So that first phase is what I call emotional armor. And emotional armor is exactly what happens when we go into a grief response. We are either in denial, or we're totally hyperactive, or we're in despair, or we're protesting. Right. So instead of denying that you're even in denial,
right,
admit it,
right,
own it. Because part of the healing is owning where you are. We talk so much about authenticity. We talk about, okay, we're going to be real, we're going to show up. Well, maybe this is actually quieting down and allowing yourself to feel whatever it is you're feeling. And so there's breathing, there's being aware of your sleep. Is your sleep disrupted? Is your food disrupted? Is your money disrupted?
Right.
So we can look at all the ways that grief trickles in and can feel like an enemy, or it's like, oh, you know what? Wow, I just realized that I made an investment and I don't know anything about this, or my husband did it, or my wife did it, or my partner did it, and I don't know anything. And then something clicks in and there's a knowing. And there's a sense of, oh, I'm going to take care of this, or I'm going to get somebody to help me take
right.
care of it. And that epiphany actually is part of moving through and with grief.
At myWorth, the last few weeks, we've been talking about mindfulness and really your mindset around money and being really mindful. And it starts with being aware, okay, and just having that acknowledgement of I'm doing something related to my money, whether it be buying a cup of coffee or whether it be in making a significant investment or buying a house. And,
yeah,
because that awareness is the beginning, because then from there you can choose the next steps. You can choose to feel how you're going to feel. And so it really falls in line with that. And, we're talking about grief, but there's a lot of financial decisions that are made in the throes of having an event that might cause grief to be there. Again, end of a relationship, a death of a loved one, loss of a job,
yes,
even there's all types of grief. Do you find that how does decision making for people really play into the phases of grief? And when is there ever a good time to make a decision, especially around money? Like sometimes you have to do things rather quickly.
Sometimes you do, and that's when it's really good if you have friends, if you have family, if you have a financial advisor who
right.
can guide you a little bit, because when you're grieving, you're scrambled.
Right.
Your brain is scrambled. You've got like a thinking disorder in a way, and nothing makes sense. And you used to be able to think straight, and you can't. So I really ask people to kind of parse things out. What are the things that you absolutely have to take care of, mm-hmm, and what are the things that can actually wait, and maybe they need to wait. Emptying the closet can wait.
Right. Right.
Making sure that you file for your kids if your kids are under the age of 18, so you can start to get some money in, is something that you need to do sooner rather than later.
Exactly. We talk about chunking it out at myWorth as now, next, and later during that kind of process. What has to be done right now, and then what can be next and what can be later. And what that does is it gives some room to breathe. And even waiting, I think I read in your book talking about waiting a year and then uncovering the headstone, and I think that that's common in some religions to have a ceremony a year after.
It is,
because so many people are surrounding someone during the period after an event. And it doesn't have to be a death, but it can be a death. And then there's the after effects. And so bringing people back together, and there's a different experience that kind of goes in line. So even chunking out your financial decisions in that way really makes a lot of sense, I think, for a lot of people.
Absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. And it's funny about the stone and waiting a year. It was actually financial. It was a financial decision because people didn't have the money for a tombstone. So they had to wait a year.
Right.
to earn the money, get the money so they could afford it. And though it's turned into something that's religious, it was actually financial.
That's very interesting. Very interesting piece of history there. So, talk a little bit about these phases. We talked about the kind of that first phase of denial, which are anger or protest or kind of that emotional armor. And you said really saying, "I'm in this stage."
I'm in it, and it's you know what? And in this phase, you keep going back to it. It is your safe harbor. So whatever you're going through, when you start to change, when you start to shift, maybe there's a day, oh, you know what, I'm not thinking about my loved one, or I actually had a good day, or I smiled, or I laughed, and then what follows often is guilt, and one of the phases is guilt. I'm not allowed to have a good day. I'm not allowed to smile. I'm not allowed to feel joy, and it's just not true, because we're humans and we're resilient, and we need to tap into the resilience of us. So the phases, like grief, are nonlinear. Though in the book they follow an order, there is no one order. And not everyone will go through every single phase. I mean, there's forgiveness, there's grace, there's guilt, there's anger and rage, there's anxiety that is just unpalpable.
Right.
It's just horrible. You feel like you can't breathe, and you can, and you are, but the anxiety can be overwhelming. And then there's role confusion. Who am I?
Right.
I don't even know who I am anymore.
Right.
And that's whether you've lost a loved one, or the role of a caretaker, or the role of maybe someone who guided them financially.
Yeah.
So, if all of a sudden that role changes, there is such a sense of loss.
It reminds me of a woman that I worked with many years ago who had lost her husband very early in life. She was in her 20s. And her husband had actually done a pretty good job. He had some life insurance. He had other money saved for her. And yet when she got the money, she felt so guilt-ridden about having this wealth be bestowed to her as a result of losing her husband. And so what she did, unfortunately, is she started giving it away to whoever asked for it. People like to come out, and sometimes, unfortunately, they take advantage of people at that time. And so she would give it all away. When I met with her, she was in her, late 40s, and she was really, really struggling to make ends meet because she felt so guilty about that. It was a very interesting dynamic of how a financial decision in the midst of guilt can also have a long-lasting effect for somebody. And I totally appreciate it. It's like, how do I feel joy when this person or this event has happened? That's or right. Even a relationship That's breaking up. I think people don't always recognize how the same stages of grief happen when you're ending a relationship, whether you're ending a job, when you're going from working to retirement.
That's right.
There's grief. So all of that kind of happens in the context of multiple types of events.
Absolutely. And healthcare issues as well.
Yeah.
Aging, and also, our sexuality. Men and women deal with different issues around their own losses. So it's really everywhere. It's everywhere, but we don't name it as such. And, it seems that if we can, maybe we won't be diagnosed with, oh, you're depressed. Rather, oh, there's some grief here. And, there's a way to get out of grief. Depression feels like you're in a box. Grief, it's a dance, and guess what? You learn to partner with it, and sometimes you rely on that partner because it slows you down. It helps you reconfigure what you're doing, what your life is going to look like. And when I was 27 when my first husband died, and I didn't have a clue what I was doing, where I was going, but his death framed my life in so many ways, and I wouldn't be doing this work had he not died. So I pay his life forward every day, and it's been a while, but every single day. And so that's the gift, because I'm able to pay that loss forward, sitting here with you and having this great conversation, and who knows, where you will then take this conversation and pay it forward. And through it all, there's a lineage, and that lineage is so important.
Edy and I actually know each other. We're in a mutual group of speakers that do a lot of keynote speaking, and so we had a chance to talk offline many times. And one of the things that we talked about is this interesting dynamic that we're seeing where a couple, man, woman, 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 man, whatever. Where there's a couple that's been together for a long period of time, and there's been kind of a division of financial responsibilities as a result, where one may pay the bills and one may handle some of the long-term planning. And it typically happens in a male-female relationship where we think the men will pass first.
That's
because
right.
that's typically what statistics have shown us. And so, but you're finding in some of your work, and so we always educate women to get to know what the financial situation is.
That's right.
How are you going to take care of yourself after that point in time? You may live 10, 15 years longer. So we've been doing a lot of education around that, but we've had an interesting conversation about how you're starting to see the reverse when the woman passes first, and then the men are left not knowing how to pay bills.
Right, because the women have been doing it and then they don't have a clue. So, it's especially around finances, make sure both of you know what's going on.
Right.
Make sure that if you have a financial advisor, that both of you have sat down and you understand how things work.
Right.
Because, if as a woman, you've been doing all the bills and your partner doesn't have a clue about what's going on, I don't hope that something happens to you, but on the other hand, he might be lost, and I'm finding that a lot of men are lost. And it might be a great way. There can be a lot of money stress, but it could be a really great way to sit down,
Right.
Laugh about it a little bit and share what knowledge you each have and carry.
Right.
So
Kind of giving back and forth, I think,
Yeah.
is a great way to even
Absolutely.
approach that conversation. So many people ask me, how do you begin the conversation? I said, well, you don't walk in and say, what do you have written in your will? You have a gentler conversation. And I think that
Absolutely.
especially I'm finding when I've met with people after there's been a traumatic event, having the ability to meet them where they are and provide that grace
That's
is so
right.
valuable. And there's a process that kind of goes through. I want to take a step back and talk a little bit about forgiveness and the role that plays, and especially in not just forgiving the other person if there is a kind of a blame or a causation that really causes there to be a dissolution of a relationship or the
Sure.
loss of somebody, but really talking about how does one forgive themselves and kind of the process of grieving a mistake perhaps that they may have made. Do you have any advice for our viewers on that?
It's such an important question. It's thought provoking, because what is forgiveness? A lot of people think that to forgive means to forget.
Right, or accept, like it's okay.
Right. And I don't even use the word acceptance in the book, because I don't happen to believe in acceptance. I think that it's an integration. So this is about integrating forgiveness. And again, you can't change what happened. You can learn from it, though. And maybe part of integration is okay, what did I learn? How can I move forward with this new knowledge? And I'm going to forgive my lack of showing up for myself or having a voice. And I'm going to forgive that within myself. If I walk around feeling angry because of what someone's done to me, they win.
Absolutely. I think that a lot of times I see kind of a victimization kind of perpetuating in a lot of different people.
And that just leaves you bitter.
And you have no control over
right.
what happens to yourself. If you have given that control to somebody else, you're the victim, then you've released the ability for you to control what actions you take. And so one of the very first steps is saying, I may not have caused this event, but it is what it is. And here's where I'm at. And now I can choose how I'm going to respond in the face of this and take control of how my response is going to be. Anger is such a tricky thing. I think so many people get really resentful and angry, and they let that rule their lives. Any tips for our viewers that are stuck in that anger on how to, other than just embrace it and integrate it, how do you really move through that?
Well, one of the things that I really adhere to in the book is that anxiety, anger, you really can't live with those. I mean, they eat you up.
Right.
Whereas sadness, you can. And if you can get to sadness, it's actually a really good place to be, because we can all live with our sadnesses. Anger is untenable, and what a force it is.
Yeah.
And it affects our health, it affects gut health, it affects our brains, it affects the way that we initiate conversations and the way we live. So what is the best thing? Again, acknowledge it. Are you raging?
Right.
Wow. Okay. So really, do you really want to be living like that? It's a terrible position to be in.
Yeah.
And if you really want to take anger on, well, I don't know that you want it by your side, but maybe you want to project it onto a screen and say, okay, let me kind of see the movies of my life that have, been angry or have, really been pivot points for me where I've felt rage. And then break it down, okay, what could I have done differently? And be kind to the self. And I work a lot with archetypes, and there's the archetype of the angry person. An archetype is something that we all understand and know, like mother. If I mention mother, you know what mother is.
Right.
So the anger archetype, do I really want to be this angry? No, I really don't. Well, what can I bring on? How can I bring in kindness? Oh, wow. Okay, so let me think about ways that I could be kind to myself right now. And it's amazing. Even my voice softens when I even think about it. And how do you soften it? Acknowledge it, but also soften.
As you were talking about this, it just kind of dawned on me how many people are really angry about money issues. And especially I see this, typically, families will dissipate because of money. Marriages break up because of money. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of financial shame out there. I do a lot of speaking on that when I talk, and how that shame can breed, anger and resentment. It can bring the destruction of relationships. It can bring kind of not taking a step forward and being almost paralyzed inside of that and not looking at that. And so you said something that I think was so important that we could take away from just the conversation about anger is giving yourself the kindness, giving yourself permission to feel the kindness and know that it's going to be okay. And that kindness really is a juxtaposition of anger in terms of how it can start to dissipate.
Absolutely. It's really changing the message that you're giving yourself.
Yeah.
Do you really want to be walking around feeling enraged, angry, or what else is really going on? Because usually if you're feeling angry, there's something that you're not getting.
Right.
And it probably has nothing to do with money.
Right.
It might have a lot to do with not being seen or held.
Absolutely.
Or acknowledged.
And anger has such a rippling effect. The thing we want most typically as human beings is to feel that sense of belonging, to feel love, and to feel joy.
Right.
And anger really prevents that from happening, and learning to let things go. I think there's there's people that I know that can get angry and really seem to be triggered very easily, and it's always like there's times when you can just let it go, like know when to pick your battles. And then there's other people that never get angry. Have you seen people that tend to hold anger and never get angry because they're afraid of letting it go?
Sure, of course. And show me someone who doesn't get angry or doesn't show they're angry, and I'll show you someone who's got maybe high blood pressure or has very high anxiety levels. Right. Can't really be in relationships because anger is normal.
Yeah.
It's not about getting rid of the anger. If someone comes in to see me and they're not angry, I'm concerned. Yeah. I want anger, but I don't want the anger that eats you up.
Right. That expends over a long period of time.
Anger is normal. It's good to have some anger. I'm talking about the anger that you're just walking around raging all the time.
Right. Right.
And that's not good either.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
it's a kindness, and it's changing the thought process. I can choose to be angry here. I can choose to be really furious, but am I going to get heard? Am I really going to get heard?
Get what you really want, which is to be seen and heard.
Yeah.
So when we think about kind of how to deal with grief, whether it be through the loss of a job, the loss of a loved one, the loss of maybe a relationship, or the ending of a period of time, is there any kind of parting words you'd like to give our viewers about if they're in the middle of doing that? What is maybe one or two things they could do to start to kind of get present and become aware and start to dance with that grief?
Yeah. So it is a dance, and it's okay to ask for help. So many people think, oh, I'm gonna muscle my way through this, and I'm not gonna get any help, and everything's gonna be just fine. And, you know, it doesn't matter if you're an introvert or an extrovert. You know, if you're an extrovert, great, go to your friends, go to your family, talk about it. If you're more of an introvert, guess what? There's lots of things online that you can learn, that you can read. So, you know, just don't do it alone. You know, reach out. You know, reach out to one person, reach out to many. So that's one piece of advice. And the other is, don't let anybody tell you, you mean you're not better yet? You know, what's wrong? You mean it's 3 months and you're not over it? And don't let anybody tell you how long this process is, because it's yours.
Thank you so much for
Thank
being
you.
with us.
Thank you.